Okay. Is it turned on?
Yes, it started now. All right, you can begin.
Okay. Thank you. A pleasant good evening to all. Pleasant good evening to all our colleagues in the MGPS. Pleasant good evening, Mr. Bisu. My name is Swaran Dudnat, and my group would be myself and Carleen Mohan, and we would be presenting from the textbook Exploring Leadership, which is by Comives, Lucas, and McMahon. In particular, we'll be dealing with Chapter 6, Leading with Integrity and Moral Purpose.
In this chapter, our objectives, we will be looking at 1, a discussion of the process of creating and sustaining an ethical organizational environment.
An analysis of the moral dimensions and transforming leadership theory.
And finally, an examination of the ethical influences that participants have on their organizations through behavior modeling.
Integrity is connected with respect. Without integrity, you cannot gain the respect of your fellow members, and without that respect, organizational goals are not attained. The integrity of leaders also reflects the integrity of the organization and its members. Because the leaders are the most visible people in the organizations, their actions and its values reflect on all those who are involved. This is according to Melissa Schlotterer, who is an accounting major at Kent State University. Right. And we'd like to engage the class almost immediately with this topic before we actually delve into the topic itself, right? And we have asked one or two of our colleagues to assist us with this part, and it's more or less with the topic, leading with integrity and moral purpose, right? And the question really is, in the context of the subject, leading with integrity and moral purpose, right? Why do you think that we, and when I say we are speaking about the MGPS, students in MGPS are in a program such as this, or why would they want to introduce a topic such as this to us, right? So at this time, I would like to ask my colleague, Mr. Jason Dover, if he can just comment on the question or the topic at hand. Jason?
Yes, Swaran. All right, so I believe that we were sent to take part in this program because as leaders in the protective services, it is crucial for us to possess integrity and moral purpose because we are the custodians of national security, which is one of the most essential organs in the executive, right? If we are not educated on the dire importance of integrity and moral leadership, widespread corruption will basically be the order of the day, right? Which will result in a catastrophic collapse of national security. Right? So that is why I think that we have been sent to do this program.
Thank you very much, Jason. Thank you for your comments and opinion on the topic. I would also like to call on one more colleague of ours, Darren Earl. Could you care to share your perspective on the topic or the conversation at hand, please?
Afternoon. Okay, thanks, Swan. In terms of integrity and moral purpose, in agreement with what Jason would have said, I also view it as leading. To lead, the leader himself needs to know where he or she is going. And we must be able to communicate that. Also, communicate it with a sense of purpose. And I think that being able to absorb all the information given through this leadership and leadership and ethics class, and then finding some way to constitute that into your leadership style or pattern would contribute immensely towards organization and your peers and subordinates, because the goal is to let everybody engage and play a better part when they formalize what the plan is with regards to the job's goals and tasks in the long run.
Thank you very much, Darren, for your input. And that's exactly where we want the class minds is where we go through this topic in terms of leading with integrity and moral purpose. That we are here with respect to going back out into organizations, and at some point in time, we are already in middle management, and we would be taking up leadership in our different organizations at some point in time, so that we would want people, or the organization would want people to lead with integrity and a moral purpose.
How do we create and sustain an ethical organizational environment? We do so by understanding and applying ethical theories and models that operate from organizational values or codes of conduct, as well as by being aware of our own moral development and that of others within our organization. And that is the way that is what we do to help create and sustain an ethical organizational environment.
Creating and sustaining an ethical organizational environment. Nash 1990 proposes 4 qualities that are necessary for participants to advance ethical standards in an organization. They are: 1, critical thinking skills to analyze and convey the ethical components of a problem or dilemma.
2, a high degree of integrity to stand up for your own personal and professional ethics.
3, the ability to see situations from others' perspective, which is really showing concern for others.
And finally, a personal motivation to do what is right.
Okay. These 4 qualities of leadership, when translated into behavior and action, help create an ethical organizational environment. When you identify a problem as having moral or ethical implications and involve others in the decision-making process, you provide an example of how an ethical environment is established. Several strategies and interventions can be used to create and maintain an ethical climate in a group or organizational setting. The process of doing so should be intentional and include all the elements of the relational leadership model and the dimensions of knowing, being, and doing. Before I forget, I also like to mention, you all can feel free to interject or any comments that you all may have whilst we go along. So feel free.
Not all leadership is good leadership. Our learning about leadership can come from both the positive and negative examples. This is according to Kellerman 2004 and Blumen 2005, who addresses the notion of bad or toxic leaders and their resulting negative consequences. Kellerman went on to further divide bad leadership into 2 categories, namely bad as in an ineffective leader and bad as in an unethical leader.
Her definition of ineffective leadership includes the failure to achieve a desired change, whereas unethical leadership fails to distinguish between right and wrong. Someone can be an ineffective leader but be considered an ethical leader. I'll say that again. Someone can be an ineffective leader but be considered an ethical leader. Although the goals were not accomplished, the person still led with integrity. Ideally, leaders and followers are effective and ethical as they work to achieve a shared vision or a common agenda.
All right, for example, we may have persons, and I'm using TTPS in this example, where persons would be considered an ineffective leader because they may refuse to engage in an unethical practice. For instance, you might have officers who will go out there, let's say on a warrant exercise, and they may be told, hey, listen, when you come in here, your goal after the completion of this exercise is to come in with 10 arrests. And they may in fact come in with 6, but they might, right? But they might be you know, trying to be, somebody might try to influence them to, hey, let us go for 12 instead now. Let us indicate, hey, we want to exaggerate how much we arrest so that we would look good for the seniors. Another example with TTPS officers as well would be like recently, I don't know if you guys saw in the newspaper, where 3 officers were held in Southwestern Division, the Safe Zone Unit. And 2 of the persons were later charged for incidents involving corrupt practices. Now, they were considered effective because they delivered, you know, they delivered on their arrest. They achieved the standards, you know, the seniors told them, hey, go out there and I want 20 tickets and 10 arrests, and they got that. However, the actions eventually led to, you know, their arrest because they were considered or deemed unethical and wrong in how they carried about themselves.
Here are a few examples of behaviors and traits associated with toxic leaders. Leaving their followers worse off than they found them.
Violating their basic standards of human rights by their human rights of their own supporters, as well as those of other individuals or groups that do not count among their followers.
Leaders also consciously feeding their followers illusions that enhance the leader's power and impair the followers' capacity to act independently. Example, persuading followers that the leader is the only one who can save them or the organization.
And they would also exhibit these toxic traits by playing on the fears or the needs of the followers. For instance, you might have a senior who would have an officer in TTPS who probably works and lives in the district. But for whatever reason, he will constantly play on that person's fear and say, hey, I gotta get you transferred, you know, you gotta come out from here, I gotta send you Cedros, I gotta send you Tobago. You know, those are examples of toxic leaders, some traits of a toxic leader.
Also misleading followers through deliberate untruths and misdiagnosis of issues and problems.
An insatiable ambition that prompts the leaders to put their own sustained glory, power and glory, and the fortunes above their followers' well-being.
Enormous egos that blind leaders to the shortcomings of their own character and thus limit their capacity for self-renewal.
Another trait is being reckless and disregarding the cost of their actions, how it might impact others as well as themselves.
Last but not least, cowardice that leads them to shrink from the difficult choices.
We have a saying in TTPS, a lot of people, you know, they want the rank, but they don't want the responsibilities that comes with it.
Right. On the other side of the award continuum, unethical behavior should be addressed. Public humiliation was a practice commonly used in the past to confront and punish violators of the law or ethical standards. I think being ethical is absolutely necessary when talking about leadership. You have to have some moral code from which your ideals come. If you act unethical in any way, you are hurting not only yourself, but those who look up to you. In the real world, not everyone operates in an ethical manner, but I truly believe that those who do end up being the winner in the long run. That's according to Tim Slaughter, Vice President of Leadership Development and former member of the Student Senate at Texas A&M University.
In any organization, ethical behaviors should always be encouraged by both the leaders and the followers. They should be committed to a high moral value, you know, aimed at achieving the organization's goals.
Some organizations lack a positive ethical environment because leaders and participants are not committed to a moral orientation. These types of organizations may, in fact, reward unethical behavior because it is seen as improving the organization. An example of this would be an organization that uses unethical practices during membership recruitment to increase its membership. This type of organizational environment would support shortcuts, poor quality work, cover-ups, and a lack of personal responsibility for mistakes or problems.
Individuals who are committed to leading with integrity sometimes face their own dilemmas when their values and their principles clashes with the organization's standards. And this can be a very, very difficult situation and has only three choices. One is to ignore or put up with the situation. Two, to address this situation and work to change the organizational climate into one that is ethical in nature. And some may even leave the organizations. And this is something that we struggle with on an almost everyday basis.
Because as leaders, we are faced with decisions, difficult decisions, and decisions that requires some ethical principle or values or moral conduct, right? And just as we have being physically fit, there is also something called ethical fitness. Kidder 2005 describes ethical fitness as getting in shape to tackle the tough ethical dilemmas as they arise. That same fitness applies to our ability to express moral courage. Being ethically fit means being mentally engaged, thinking about the dilemma you are facing, reasoning through it, and grappling with the tough issues. All of this requires practice, thinking through potential ethical dilemmas so you are used to this process when faced with a real dilemma. This is one way to prepare for the ethical fitness test.
So being ethically fit, indicates takes a lot of practice, coming up with different scenarios in your head, wrestling with the different ethical dilemmas and coming up with possible solutions so that when we out there as leaders, we know what to do. We know how to act.
Moral purpose as an act of courage. It takes personal courage to do the right thing. Sharon Watkins, a former executive of Enron, displayed personal courage when she exposed breaches of conduct by her boss, Ken Lay. She showed both personal courage and integrity in taking a stand against the unethical practices of Enron. In an interview, Watkins described her efforts as, quote, symbolizing that individual actions matter and that you have to take ownership for your actions when you are in a position of leadership. I'll say that again. Watkins described her efforts as, quote, symbolizing that individual actions matter and that you have to take ownership of your actions when you are in a position of leadership. Greg Levoy, 2000, a former reporter for the Cincinnati Enquirer, uses the metaphor of stone sculpting. He basically said to illustrate integrity and personal courage. To tell if a stone is true, you bang on it with a hammer. A dull tone indicates a fault. The stone will crack when you work on it. But a clear ring, one that hangs in the air, means the stone is true. It has integrity and it will hold up under pressure or repeated blows.
Kidder, 2005, describes moral courage as the ability or the quality of mind and spirit that enables one to face up to ethical challenges firmly and confidentially without flinching or retreating. Moral courage can be viewed as the intersection between three conceptual fields. Those are principles, danger, and endurance.
For example, it took moral courage for Nelson Mandela to be imprisoned for 18 years for his opposition to apartheid in South Africa. And points to note, in organizations and in leadership, we will be all faced with difficult decisions at times, as we said before. And there would be consequences when you stand up for the right thing or you act with moral courage. Having an awareness of danger is key in possessing moral courage, right? A willingness to endure some type of hardship, such as risking losing friends or a job, is a component of moral courage, right? The opposite would be doing or saying nothing or turning away when faced with ethical dilemmas. Upholding one's principles and putting them into action allows leaders to operate with moral courage.
One must be extremely courageous or strong and possess high levels of integrity in order to stand up to others for the right thing. Sometimes we may feel we want to, but we're fearful. We want to retreat because of the pressures that we know that will come after. So it takes a high moral principles with that might be dangerous in nature, and one must have the ability to endure hardships, to act with moral purpose.
Right. Assumptions about ethical leadership. Leadership is leadership that is both ethical and effective. Right. Lucas and Anello, 1995, proposes 8 assumptions about ethical leadership.
1, ethics is the heart of all leadership.
This really says it is the central issue in leadership. This is according to Suella, 1995. You cannot have a complete discussion about leadership without including the ethical components associated with leadership processes. Good leadership means leadership that is effective in that goals were achieved and that follows a sound and ethical process.
Another ethical assumption is that all leadership is values driven.
What this translates to is that we need to reframe leadership so that it represents values that reflect good leadership. Participants and leaders bring to the organization their own values and beliefs about how people should be treated, notions of what is right versus what is wrong, and ideas about what is just and fair.
Personal values intersect with organizational values.
Right. This translates into the journey to ethical leadership begins with an examination of personal values, as well as ongoing reflection of personal core values and how these values are related to the values of the organization or community. Your personal moral compass will guide you in wrestling with ethical dilemmas and eventually will point you in the direction of making a decision based on ethical analysis, consideration of opposing viewpoints, your personal values, and the values of your organization.
The 4th ethical assumption is that leadership can be learned.
This says that ethical learning is a process involving experience, reflection, conceptualization, and application. Trial and error experiences can sharpen your ethical analysis as well as your reflection about notions of what is just and fair in a given situation.
Ethical leadership involves a connection between ethical thought and action.
That is, linking moral reasoning with values and action is imperative in leadership. The point of this chapter is not to have you memorize dozens of ethical theories. The goal is to engage you in ethical analysis and insights based on theories and concepts applied to real-life experiences.
6, character development is an essential ingredient of ethical leadership.
Which says a leader's character is defined by his or her actions and behaviors, not simply by the values that are espoused. Leaders can be popular yet not be respected by the public because they lack congruency between their values and actions. In other words, they don't walk their walk.
7, ethical leadership is a shared process.
Members at all levels of an organization or community have the opportunity and responsibility to participate in the process of exercising ethical leadership. Ethical leadership is a shared process, not just the responsibility of a positional leader. Leaders and participants share the responsibility of advancing core organizational values and of doing the right thing.
And number 8, we have everything that we do teaches something.
That is, role modeling is a powerful way to influence the ethical climate in families, organizations, and communities. We learn by watching others and we make judgments about what is acceptable and unacceptable behavior in an organization. If any member, including the positional leader, routinely discriminates against other students in a membership recruitment process, then others in the organization might believe it is acceptable to exclude students of color in extending invitations to join the group.
Leading with moral purpose calls for an examination of your own assumptions about what is ethical and what is unethical. What is good leadership versus bad leadership. What is toxic behavior versus non-toxic traits? And how far are we willing to go to advance our core values and do what is right? What are you willing to risk to achieve these values of justice and fairness? And how you would wrestle with an inconsistency between your values and the values within your organization.
Cultural assumptions. Ethics exist in a cultural context. That is, they are culturally bound or culture specific. There is no universal agreement on what behaviors or practices are considered appropriate, legal, ethical, or moral across cultures. This is according to Henderson and Toffler, 1992 and 1986. For example, the intentional oppression of and discrimination against women in Saudi Arabia is considered ethical, legal, and moral in that country, but it is considered unethical, illegal, and immoral in the United States.
Ethics are also temporal in nature, and especially in light with the changing laws and the legal norms. What was considered many to be an ethical and legal standard practice until the 1960s, and that is dealing with the having different water fountains for persons of color, was considered legal at that time. However, now it is considered illegal, unethical, and immoral in today's society in the US.
Kanungo and Mendonca, 1996, assert that morally good acts are based on moral laws that are universal because they incorporate fundamental values such as truth, goodness, beauty, courage, and justice. These values are found in all cultures, although cultures may differ with regard to application of these values. Right, and this, according to KEDA 2005, we identify 8 common values. They are love, truthfulness, fairness, freedom,
unity, tolerance, responsibility, and respect for life.
Seligman 2002 identifies 6 virtues common to more than 200 religious and philosophical traditions: wisdom and knowledge, courage, love and humanity, justice, temperance, and spirituality and transcendence. Although different cultures may provide varying definitions of these virtues, the basic ideals of these virtues are similar from culture to culture.
Anthropological studies have documented divergent moral views and practices interculturally and intraculturally. Notions of right and wrong or justice and injustice are validated by the values and attitudes of a given culture. To place worth on moral concepts through intercultural comparison is futile. For example, many American women believe the veil worn by Muslim women constitutes sexist behavior and practices. However, a Muslim woman does not see it that way. That's her right, that's her custom. That's required from her for religious purposes.
And this is because we just said cultural thing, it varies in different countries, and you may even have a different culture in the same country or different cultures in the same country. What is socially practiced and acceptable in one culture may be repudiated in another. This brings up the painful or perhaps sobering reality that there is no moral consensus in international affairs. Ethics and morals differ not only among various countries, but among individuals in the same country, right? For example, we have cultures in Trinidad itself. We have North culture is different to South culture, right? Even when we go into the academy, even the South people, when we go into the training or the barracks, right? There is, you get the connotation of the talking about South men, we just do it different in North, and similarly in the East. So cultures do vary in one country as well as other countries.
Another cultural assumption is cultural tolerance implies that differences in practices are recognized, but not for the purpose of imposing or changing practices to suit a particular cultural belief. Cultural relativism is germane to a specific culture, society, or community. And the goal of comparing cultures is to understand them. It's not to judge them, to say, hey, you good and you're bad. It's to understand the difference in culture. Corruption is a culturally constructed behavior with varying degrees of tolerance and therefore varying frequencies of occurrences across different countries.
With respect to cultural relativism, I would have had the opportunity, I don't know if any soldier in the group here would have had the opportunity to work in ICC back in 2007. Well, I would have had the opportunity to work in 4 Caribbean countries, Grenada, St. Vincent, Barbados, and Lucia. And I remember we walking in the streets of Grenada with our uniform and our firearms in our waist, and the people there were like, hey, Saudi, all they don't need them guns and all they waste here, all they go and put back that in all the pillow in all the dormitory, and all they could walk here freely, you know. And the culture there was so different. And I remember asking some soldiers up there if they would ever come to Trinidad for a little vacation or holidays, and many of them indicated no. Franco meant no. They said that no, they're afraid Trinidad. They don't want to come to Trinidad because you know, so the culture is different in different Caribbean countries.
Ethical theories and moral purpose. The study of human behavior as it relates to ethics and the ethical development reaches back to the philosophers and kings Aristotle, Plato, and Socrates, as well as 18th and 19th century philosophers and scholars such as Immanuel Kant and John Stuart Mills.
Ethical theories provide a glimpse into how human judgments are made and the thought processes individuals engage in to solve ethical dilemmas and other problems. In the next section, transforming leadership theory is described as the foremost theory that incorporates a moral component and its foundation for leadership.
The transforming leadership theory. The leadership theory that this is a leadership theory that includes a strong component of ethics and morals. And the philosopher for that is James McGregor. Burns' transforming leadership theory. As noted in chapter 2 of the text, transforming leadership is a process by which, quote, leaders and followers raise one another to higher levels of morality and motivation.
Transforming leadership reaches moral dimensions when the leaders and participants' behavior and ethical aspirations are elevated by mutual influence on one another. Transforming leadership involves persuasion, a desire to change something, and a multi-directional influence relationships between the leaders and participants. It's according to Rust, 1991. In any leadership situation, participants can and often do influence leaders to higher ethical ends.
The values and ideals such as peace, justice, fairness, liberty, equal opportunity, and people's general welfare are expressed by the transformational leader. And Burns labeled these ideals as end values. Leaders, superiors, or participants, and others influence these values through specific behaviors. And the leader's fundamental act is to induce people to be aware or conscious of what they feel and to feel their needs so strongly so as to define their values so meaningfully that they can move to purposeful action.
Transforming leadership theory is about the relationship and influence between leaders and their followers. This symbiotic relationship is an interaction of power and shared values. It is the power of a person to become a leader, armed with high principles and rising above self-interest, who may ultimately transform both leaders and followers into persons who jointly adhere to moral values and end values.
Lauren Brinkley, who is the president of the student body in the University of Tennessee, says some of the core ethical values by which she lives by is that are those of honesty, fairness, and to be kind to others.
And just look at these how simple these core ethical values are. Simple, what we deal with every day, and what was supposed to be instilled in us from children growing up: honesty, fairness, and kindness. Honesty is always important, and this is where it transformed into the organizational setting now, right? If people cannot trust you, they will not respect you. There's a challenge to be a leader that people do not respect. Fairness is also important. If you treat everyone you come into contact with in the same way, you will rarely face interpersonal problems in your organization or groups. This illustrates to people with whom you are working that you believe in them just as much as anyone else, that you respect them as a person, and that you value their contribution to the group. Kindness is the final one. While it is important to be firm, it is also important to lead with heart.
The moral purpose of both the leader and participants are the key factors in transforming leadership process. Change will result when there are shared moral purposes. And there are 7 characteristics used by Tishi and Devana to characterize transforming leaders. 2 are related to ethical and moral dimensions of leadership, and those are being courageous and value-driven. Transforming leaders must have the courage to confront reality, even if it's painful, and to have healthy egos and in order to withstand peer pressures. Transformational leaders must possess positive self-esteem, and also they must be value-driven. It is said that they have to have the capacity to inspire other individuals through influence and modeling their behaviors for followers to mimic, because these leaders who inspire also encourage admiration amongst their followers.
Okay. As we continue, transforming leadership theory. Possessing positive self-esteem, not needing to please others to win their favor, is a necessary element of leading with moral purpose. Right? How often have we done things to please people and do it because it was the right thing to do? Many a times we have seen it. Probably we ourselves have done it. We do things to please people and not because it probably was the right thing to do. Transformational leaders are also value-driven. They have a core set of values that are consistent with their actions. There are several ways in which a leader can inspire others to higher levels of morality: through influence and through modeling behaviors that become the standards for others to follow.
If a participant admires or identifies with another member or leader, they will be more likely to imitate that person's behavior. The social learning theory provides this framework for understanding how individuals learn from others. And that's from Sims and Lorenzo. And Bandurad, who is the pioneer for the social learning theory, postulated that people can learn indirectly from observations or by vicarious learning.
And we also know of the, in one of our previous courses, we would have learned about the Bandura and the Bobodel theory, where he would have demonstrated learning by also the social learning theory by children looking at someone beating up on a bobo doll, right? Observational learning has its history in the practices of ancient Greeks, who refer to this concept as imitation or mimesis. Behavioral modeling by leaders and participants offers a type of vicarious learning stimulus in organizational settings.
Andrew Ho, who's a graduate from the University of Maryland, indicated that modeling up with a moral purpose. And he indicated, and I quote, "I handle ethical dilemmas by examining the situation, weighing the pros and cons, and evaluating the situation against my personal ethics, morals, and values." He goes on to say, "I believe the most hopeful thing in handling ethical dilemmas is to know yourself well, know what your morals and values and ethics are, and gain some practice in handling ethical dilemmas. That way you will have the courage to stand by what you believe in when ethical dilemmas occur."
Right. So in going through this chapter, we thought that this or this should be one of our recommendations with respect to this whole chapter. And if we don't take away anything from this chapter, I would ask that we more or less adopt this principle. I particularly like this principle where in handling with Andrew Hu, right? We handles ethical dilemmas, like weighing the pros and cons, right? Evaluating the situation against his personal ethics, morals, values, and gain some practice in handling ethical dilemmas, right? That way, well, you will have courage to stand by what you believe in when you yourself or we ourselves are faced with ethical dilemmas in life or in the organizational setting. Vicarious learning or behavioral modeling has important implications for the leadership process. Organizational and community members can learn ethical practices by observing those who model these practices in their leadership approaches.
An example of behavioral modeling by leaders occurs when a football coach benches the star player for violating some rules. Even though the coach knows that this player is necessary to clinch the playoff, he's the star player. The organizational and team members learn by observing how his peers treated, how their peers are treated. And that negative consequences could result from negative behaviors. And Simpson Lorenzi, 1992, referred to this phenomena as the outcome expectations.
There's also, before we go further, we could recall this stemming from something like positive reinforcement as well as negative reinforcement, where good behavior is rewarded, Participants also might infer that the leader possesses a high degree of integrity and is motivated to do the right thing. The behavior of the leader or the coach in the example then influences team members to act ethically because that is what is reinforced, or because they want to avoid punishment for unethical behavior, or both. And that was just referring to positive and a negative reinforcement.
We go on to moral talk. According to Birds and Waters, moral talk provides an interesting notion of modeling and influencing ethical behavior through verbal exchange or dialogic leadership. It allows people to explore the moral complexities and the dimensions of problems or dilemmas, to explore the situation as it is. Dialogic leadership or moral talk can be used in student organizations as a way to model ethical approaches and to help and create and sustain an ethical environment.
Right. Moral muteness. What is moral muteness, right? Unfortunately, the individuals often hesitate to participate in moral talk or discussions about ethical dilemmas. So according to Bird and Waters, 1989. Although the topic of ethics is encountered by individual leaders and participants, little discourse, very little discussion about ethics takes place among group members, right? And this lack of discussion referred to as moral muteness. And there are reasons for this. The avoidance of complex problems with moral overtones, protection of the positional leader's own managerial flexibility in solving problems, and avoidance of dealing with varying ideological or moralistic perspectives, all of which potentially inhibits the problem-solving process.
Group members may also avoid these type of ethical discussions and morals because they lack ethical understanding. They are ethically illiterate.
Moral expressions have the potential to arouse feelings of connections with moral actions. Moral talk can be used as a type of modeling influence when the dialogue is used to identify problems, consider issues, advocate and criticize policies, as well as justify and explain decisions.
The ethical decision-making models. The leadership process is filled with daily ethical dilemmas and problems that do not have identifiable solutions, and that leaders and participants need to confront and resolve almost on a daily basis. It is not solely the responsibility of the leader to address these dilemmas or to confront these unethical behavior. The relational leadership model, with emphasis on inclusive and process-oriented leadership to achieve results for the common good, suggests that both the leader and the members be included in addressing ethical dilemmas. Leaders and participants together needs to be reflective, challenging, caring, purposeful, and consultative when they are working through any ethical issues they may have to deal with.
There are several approaches you can use to resolve ethical dilemmas. Some situations might call for using a professional code of conduct. For example, the professional code of lawyers and physicians is guided by standards upheld by their respective professional associations. Religious and counseling professionals are guided by a strict adherence to client confidentiality, unless a client is a potential harm to self or others.
Like leadership, ethics is not always a neat and a tidy concept. Not all situations can be resolved by the application of professional codes or organizational standards. Sometimes it requires human judgment and analysis to determine whether the situation is in fact an ethical dilemma or whether it is something else, for instance, a clash of personality between members.
Ethical decision-making models encourage people to work through dilemmas with a moral purpose in mind and provide frameworks with which to guide decision-making and analysis. Rather than react quickly to dilemmas, you should carefully consider various steps, including ethical analysis, toward making sound decisions. Kidder 1995 defines tough choices as those that pit one right value against one another.
The really tough choices do not always center upon the right versus wrong. They involve right versus right, and they are genuine dilemmas precisely because each side of the problem is firmly rooted in one of our basic core values.
All right, Kidder 2005 provides a framework for examining right versus right, using a 4-dilemma paradigm model.
1. Justice versus mercy. That is fairness and equity, conflict with compassion, empathy, and love.
2. Short-term versus long-term, which is immediate needs run counter to future goals.
3. Individual versus a community. That is self versus others, or a small group versus a larger group.
And 4. Truth versus loyalty, which translates to honesty competes with commitment, responsibility, or promise keeping.
Kidder provides these 3 principles for ethical decision making, and they are ends-based thinking, rule-based thinking, and care-based thinking.
Right. These 3 components, they should be considered when in the ethical decision making model, right? According to Kidder, right, end-based thinking, and this philosophers refer to it as utilitarianism, best known by the maxim, do whatever produces the greatest good for the greatest number, right? Based on cost-benefit analysis, determining who will be hurt and who will be helped. At the heart of this principle is an assessment of consequences, a forecasting of outcomes.
The rule-based thinking, which is Kant's categorical imperative, follow that only the principle that you want everyone else to follow. And you ask yourself, if everyone in the world followed this rule of action I am following, would that create the greatest good or the greatest worth of character? The rule-based thinking is based firmly on duty, what we ought to do rather than what we think might work. This is deontological thinking, meaning based on our moral obligation.
I'm sure many of you would be thinking back to our class with ethics with Dr. King. This brings back it juggles the memory, I'm sure. And care-based thinking, putting love for others first. The golden rule is an example of care-based thinking. Do to others what you would have them do to you. Care-based thinking puts the feature of reversibility into play. Test your actions by putting yourself in another's shoes and imagining how it would feel if you were the recipient rather than the perpetrator of your actions. right? And we are saying these three principles can be applied in examining ethical dilemmas as you begin to work through their complexities and decide the right course of action.
Here are some ethical dilemmas to consider. Would you turn your father or mother into the police if he robbed the bank? Or Swaran, would you turn your mother in if she hit a pedestrian and fled the scene?
I really can't answer that. Right? That's a very difficult decision to make. And I'm sure if that would happen to any one of us, we would probably be in a similar predicament, you know, faced with an ethical dilemma such as this. If it's a loved one, for example, if it's a homeless person, you know, and you're with your wife or your son or your daughter in the car and you manage to or happen to accidentally bounce on that homeless person, nobody would really miss that person, you know. I mean, and
You
you
would
could
try
probably
to
go your way. And
justify your action.
you might try to justify that. Any comment here?
Oh, yes, of course. Well, you know, as law enforcement officers, well, you all are police officers, and myself as a member of the defense force, you know, somewhere along the line, the question is always asked, right? If our parents or brother or close family member commit a crime, and if it is, we have to arrest them, will we do it? Right? And this is where I believe the ethical dilemma will actually play on one's mind pertaining to the situation. But the ethical thing to do is to turn them in, right? It will be unethical, you know, not to turn them in because, you know, they did commit a crime.
Mm-hmm.
I agree.
So,
I agree with you. I agree with you, Marvin. I agree, but
yeah.
sometimes it is easier said than done. Eh?
Very, very, very true. Very, 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 very true.
You know.
The
So
politically
it's still
correct.
up for grabs.
Yeah, the politically correct answer that we tend to, when we face with that, like in training and stuff like that, is like, oh, yes, 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 she go get case. I looking up my father, brother, sister, everybody. But in reality, if we are faced with that, therein lies our ethical dilemma. You know, the human aspect comes in.
And whilst we were going through this topic and we ended up at this juncture here, it brought to mind a movie that we would have watched. Well, Kali and I would have watched based on it. I believe it was a judge. I believe the name of the show was Your Honor. And I don't know if anybody had the opportunity to watch that movie where a judge was faced with decisions to make when it had involved his child, you know, and those were unethical, you know, or probably illegal decisions that he would have made, you know. So just food for thought. Ethical principles and standard. As a leader or member, you can use these 5 principles as a critical evaluative approach to moral reasoning and ethical decision-making processes. 1, respecting autonomy. 2, doing no harm. 3, benefiting others. 4, being just. And 5, being faithful.
When dealing with the ethical decision-making model, one must look at the newspaper test. And this really is a quick and informal decision-making model, right, that can influence your actions and decisions. So consider this. Before you act or decide on anything, you should consider whether you are comfortable with your actions or behaviors appearing in the newspaper. Will that alter your decision? Will it pass the newspaper test? You know, like especially for now, your actions and your behaviors, would it pass the social media test? You want to be posted out there? You know, these are things that ought to be considered when you're making ethical decisions.
Right, so we are saying, remember, these ethical decision-making models can help you reach a more informed and carefully analyzed decision before you take any action. Too often, we are tempted to quickly put out fires or react to pressing dilemmas without engaging in a process that provides some assurance that the right decision was made. These models alone will not necessarily help you resolve every dilemma you encounter, They merely provide a framework to guide your decision or our decision. They do not provide the moral imagination and creative thinking that are needed to address complex situations. All right. So we are more or less to the end of our chapter. We have here a short video that would encompass leading with integrity and moral purpose. So we now play this video, and I hope that the audio, if the audio is good enough.
Sarah, if the video is playing,
No
we are
audio?
not hearing
Okay.
you.
Let's hold on
No
one
audio.
second. Sorry about that. Hold on. Let me just get some audio.
Problems, guys?
Me, right. Okay, you were just tell me if you're hearing it now, right? Are you all hearing that?
No, not hearing anything yet.
Negative.
Okay. So I will just let the video play out, and it's about 2 minutes. So we could probably just go along with the reading. That'll be okay?
Yeah, it should be okay.
Sure, okay, thanks. Were you all able to hear anything there from the video, or still seeing just the screen?
We were just seeing the screen.
Okay.
That's all. But the text was instructive.
Okay, thanks. We do apologize for that though. So our recommendations, would strongly recommend Andrew Ho's methodology in handling ethical dilemmas.
And he says it best when he states that ethical dilemmas should be addressed by a careful examination of the issue, the weighing in the pros and cons of the issues, evaluating the situation against your own personal ethics, morals, and values, and knowing oneself. Practicing how to handle ethical issues gives us the courage to stand up for what we believe in when the time arises.
So we are saying as a leader, be true to oneself and to others, to yourself and to others.
Treat everyone with respect and always display the highest levels of integrity.
Leading with a moral purpose is central to the leadership process. Right. This brings us to the end of our presentation. We would like to thank you all for the undivided attention that you all would have given us and the contributions that you all would have made towards our presentation. And we would again like to apologize for the audio. We actually played it over and we heard it play, but I don't know for what reason it wasn't. The audio wasn't coming on the video. So at this time, any questions?
Right.
Sorry?
When you were clicking to share at the very beginning, you were supposed to, there's a toggle switch you're supposed to turn on to share audio. That may not have been done.
Okay.
All right. Any questions, anybody?
Or comments?
No questions from me, so I'm just just one comment in particular with respect to Andrew Ho. His recommendation for handling ethical dilemmas and so on. I find that to be a very good method in terms of when he spoke about practicing making ethical decisions in when faced with ethical dilemmas. So, and that kind of brought back memories of ethics class in our previous semester and so on. Yeah, so
quite true, yes.
Yeah, so it would be a good idea to practice making ethical decisions and so on from those ethical dilemmas, so that when you're actually faced with a real life ethical dilemma, you should be able to handle it well.
Thank you very much for your comment, Jason. It was really appreciated. Anybody else? Anyone else would like to comment or any questions? If not, yes.
I just have one more of a question, but a statement in words. Now that we went through moral and ethical promise of relationship model leadership, tell me what you think about this statement that politics have a morality of its own.
I prefer to stay clear of that question because we don't understand exactly what it means when they say it really has a morality of its own.
I just wanted to throw that in the mix.
Okay, God.
Definitely, God.
Thanks for the contribution. Anybody else? If not, I'll hand you all over back to Mr. Bisu. Thanks again, Mr. Bisu, and everyone else for paying attention.
All right. Well done, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we'll stop sharing at the stage.